The Legend of Zelda is one of the most beloved video game franchises out there, and for good reason. The characters, gameplay, music, and atmosphere always show Nintendo at their best. It's so good, many YouTubers, including the awesome channel you're watching right now, dedicate an entire month to it every year. So, to wrap up Zelda Month, I present CrashLove Gaming's top 10 Zelda games. Despite a huge reaction when it was revealed at E3 in 2004, Twilight Princess is pretty low on my list of favorite Zelda games. The overworld feels empty, the characters are ugly, and the art style really doesn't hold up. They went for a darker, more realistic look after the backlash against Wind Waker's cel-shaded graphics, but in my opinion it just makes the world look bland, especially in the Twilight realm where everything seems to be covered in Vaseline. I'm obviously not a fan of the art direction, but the game is on this list for a reason. Parts of the story are very interesting and can be tied into the overall lore of the series, with the hero's shade being Link's spirit from Ocarina of Time, and the theory that the Dark Interlopers have a history with Majora's Mask. This is somewhat referenced in the appearance of the fused shadow, which bears some resemblance to the mask. You even get to see what happened to Ganondorf in the Child timeline after Ocarina. There's also no denying that Midna is the best companion Link has had so far. Her character development throughout the game is something we don't usually see in Zelda. Speaking of Zelda, we get to see another badass iteration of the princess with her defying Xanth, ready to fight with sword in hand. Being a launch title for the Wii, Twilight Princess is the best selling Zelda game so far, but Breath of the Wild could change that. The original Legend of Zelda was revolutionary. It dropped you in the middle of an open world and let you do almost anything in any order, picking up weapons and items along the way. The gameplay is extremely dated now, but back in the day it felt good just running around and hitting monsters with your sword, bombing walls, and lighting trees on fire looking for secrets. Of course, with this open world gameplay and lack of tutorials at the time, the game was very hard. It still is today unless you use a guide to help you upgrade everything. It doesn't have the story, progression, or detail the later entries would have, but it definitely deserves a spot on this list due to the impact it left on the gaming industry and a time when jumping was a crazy new feature in games. For the longest time, Majora's Mask was an often overlooked entry in the Zelda franchise. Released only 2 years later, this game used a lot of assets from Ocarina of Time, but Majora's Mask couldn't be any more different than its predecessor. Instead of collecting items, get Master Sword, get more items, fight Ganon, the bulk of this game is in its side quests. There are dungeons and bosses, but you're also collecting masks and helping the people of Termina come to terms with their impending doom. The details in the story and the characters of Majora's Mask are much more prominent than any Zelda game before it. And there are some fascinating fan theories out there regarding the Stone Tower Temple, the origins of Majora and the Fierce Deity, and the relationship between Link and Termina as a whole. Interest in this game got a huge boost from the Ben Drowned creepypasta a few years ago, leading to a group of fans calling for a remake, which we eventually got on the 3DS. It's pretty rare for the Zelda series to have direct sequels or games set in the exact same world. Called Triforce of the Gods 2 in Japan, A Link Between Worlds is set in the same Hyrule as A Link to the Past, but it takes place quite a while later. What makes this game stand out is how they throw out all previous conventions and let you go anywhere and do whatever you want in any order. By the time this game was released in 2013, we were very used to getting an item in a dungeon and really only using that item to beat the dungeon boss. This game throws all that out the window by letting you rent or buy any item at any time and using them however you want. You'd think this more open world approach would have a negative impact on the story, but this game introduces Lorule, which is essentially a mirrored version of Hyrule ruled by Princess Hilda. A Link Between Worlds also brings a new mechanic to the series, letting you turn into a living painting and stick to surfaces like walls, mountains, and shields. Now, I actually really liked Skyward Sword. This was the most story-driven entry in the series so far, and Link and Zelda actually have a relationship that isn't just a destined hero saving a princess. It also explains why there are so many Links and Zeldas throughout history and gives more weight to the villains of the other games. While it is a lot more linear than some of the other games, you're mostly visiting new areas when you drop into Hyrule, and I feel the amount of story we get makes up for the lack of exploration. The motion controls here are a big point of contention with this game, but it never bothered me. Really, the only part about this game that I didn't like was getting the teardrops. Those guardians are terrifying. Also Fi. She's not that bad of a companion and gets somewhat of a redemption at the end, but man is she annoying. On the other hand, her counterpart Girahim is a great new character and I wish she'd make a return. How cool would it be if Girahim returned as a sword for Ganondorf? As the first truly open world game in the series, Breath of the Wild is a massive game with tons of things to do. The amount of freedom you have in this game is something we haven't seen since the original NES game, except now you can do a lot more than just swing your sword. You can essentially go anywhere and do anything. If you want to run straight to the final boss, you can, but have fun dying because the Guardians are no joke in the early hours of the game. Unlike most other entries in the series, you're not limited by what items you have or what dungeons you've completed. Speaking of dungeons, one downside to the open world nature of this game is that there aren't many of them. Most of the puzzles come from the many shrines that appear throughout Hyrule. If puzzles aren't your thing, there are plenty of opportunities for combat. I mentioned the Guardians earlier. They're placed throughout Hyrule and can be pretty tricky to defeat, especially if they're in a group. Lynels are another challenging enemy that require perfect timing to take down. Another area that is lacking would be the story. There isn't a whole lot, only a few cutscenes here and there, and there are memory spots hidden around the map that let you view events of the past. Even though this game is highly rated, I believe it would benefit greatly by letting you play as Link before Ganon took over. I wish I could say more, but the game is so big I haven't finished it yet. After the GameCube tech demo at Space World 2000, fans were expecting a new, more realistic Zelda game in the style of Ocarina of Time for the new console. Nintendo took it in the complete opposite direction and released Wind Waker with cel-shaded graphics and a younger, more cartoonish Link. There was a huge backlash from fans, and that negatively affected the game for years. Once people got over the change and actually played the game, the Wind Waker became a fan favorite. In spite of the graphics, this game is actually pretty dark. In the adult timeline after Ocarina, Ganon returns after being defeated by the Hero of Time. Since Link traveled to the past, there was no one to stop him. The goddesses flooded Hyrule to stop Ganon, and centuries later we start the game. Ganondorf comes back and does everything he can to preemptively keep anyone from stopping him this time. He kidnaps girls who might be Zelda, and he straight up murders 2 sages so the Master Sword doesn't reach full power. But that doesn't stop Link, the reincarnation of Zelda and the last king of Hyrule, from acquiring the Master Sword and Triforce and taking out Ganon. The final battle is one of the best endings I've seen, not just in Zelda but any game. Link finds Ganondorf and an unconscious Zelda. Ganon then tells Link how bad the conditions in Gerudo Desert were, and how he wanted to use the Triforce to bring life to his home. Ganondorf pulls the Triforce of Courage and Wisdom out of Link and Zelda, assembling all 3 pieces, but as he makes his wish, the King of Hyrule touches the Triforce and wishes for the land to be flooded again. There's a final showdown that ends with Ganondorf being stabbed in the head, and Link and Zelda return to the surface while petrified Ganon and the King are left at the bottom of the ocean. This is certainly the best characterization of Ganon and the King of Hyrule we've ever seen. Great gameplay, a fantastic story, and visuals that, while initially hated, hold up better than most games of the time, make this one of my favorite Zelda games. In the Skyward Sword entry, I mentioned that it earned its spot because of the story. The same can kinda be said for this game. The 4th game in the series, Link's Awakening, takes you out of Hyrule, away from Zelda, Ganon, and the Triforce, and leaves you stranded on Koholint Island. You meet a bunch of memorable characters, especially Marin, but the goal of this game is to collect 8 instruments so you can awaken the Windfish and leave the island. As you progress, you start to find out that it's not that simple. The island isn't real. Link is trapped in the Windfish's dream, and waking it up will erase everything and everyone on Koholint. The enemies in this game aren't attacking you because they're evil. They're trying to prevent you from erasing not just the monsters, but Marin, Richard from a totally different game, and the Naked Walrus Lady will also all cease to exist. It's a hard choice to make when you spent the entire game getting to know these characters. This darker tone would continue in games like Majora's Mask, and the story isn't the only reason Link's Awakening is placed so highly on this list. They packed a lot of game into a Game Boy cartridge for this. It plays like a mix between A Link to the Past and the original NES game. There are also side-scrolling levels and cameos from other Nintendo properties. One of the best things about this game is the music, which was composed by Kazumi Totaka. And yes, Totaka's song is included. A Link to the Past completely changed what an adventure game could be, and set the trend for future Zelda games. This game was huge, using double the amount of space as most NES games, and it was released very early in the Super Nintendo's lifecycle. A Link to the Past was a prequel to the original games, and it's the first to detail how Hyrule came to be and the origin of the Triforce. The name Ganondorf is first mentioned here, even though we don't see him, and the story of Ocarina of Time is presented in the instruction manual and the game's opening. The difference between this game and the first two isn't just the amount of lore. The jump from the NES to the much more powerful Super NES meant Link could do so much more than stab in 4 directions. Link could now move in 8 directions, slash with his sword, and use the now iconic spin attack. This might be the 3rd game in the series, but to me, this is where the Legend of Zelda really began. Of course it's Ocarina. If you played this in 1998, I guarantee it's one of your favorite games. Just like with Mario 64, Nintendo took one of their most beloved franchises into the realm of 3D and absolutely nailed it. They were able to take 2 very popular genres and basically create the template for how they would play in 3D. Cutting grass and signs in Kokiri Forest, walking out into the gorgeous Hyrule Field for the first time, the cutscenes. This game set the bar for what a gaming experience should be moving forward. To complement the amazing visuals and revolutionary gameplay, legendary composer Koji Kondo returned to give the world of Ocarina emotion through music. music. Right off the bat at the title screen, the flute sound from the original Legend of Zelda is drawn out into a piece that hints at just how deep this game is going to be. In Kokiri Forest, there's a feeling of playful innocence, and the overall theme of Hyrule Field encompasses what an epic adventure should sound like. I wish I had more time to go into every piece of music in this game, but I'm sure there are other people who can do that much more articulately than I can. Ocarina of Time often makes, if not tops, lists of greatest games of all time, but looking back at it today, it's hard to judge it objectively. If you didn't play it when it was released, and don't get those feelings of nostalgia when you hear the Hyrule Field theme, the game might not seem like a big deal, but at the very least, this game deserves the respect it gets for what it did for gaming as a whole. Those were my top 10 Zelda games. Let me know in the comments if you agree, or if you think Ocarina doesn't deserve the top spot on literally every list. Thank you for watching. That does it for this year's Zelda Month. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what top 10s you want to see next. Follow us on social media at CrashLove Gaming, and we'll see you next time.